thank you all for coming here today and giving me the opportunity to answer some questions you have about the events that occurred in our community early Sunday morning. As we all know, just before 3 a.m. Sunday, we received a 911 call from a grandmother who said she and her granddaughter were hiding in the closet after the child saw a burglar in their home. The intruder was 22-year-old Shaquan Tyrone Johnson, and Mr. Johnson died later that morning after being shot by Cary officer A.J. Lopez. What may feel like one event is actually several events that occurred over several hours in several blocks in one Cary neighborhood. And as such, there are actually 3 investigations into what happened going on at the same time. The first investigation is by our police department, looking into the home burglary as well as several larceny from cars. Members of our criminal investigations division are working with individual property owners to determine what's missing. So far, we're getting reports of electronics, cash, clothing, and other personal items having been stolen. Then there are 2 investigations into the shooting involving Officer Lopez and Mr. Johnson. The first and most important of these is a criminal investigation into Mr. Johnson's death, which is being conducted by the State Bureau of Investigation at our request. The SBI will report their findings directly to Wake County District Attorney Lauren Freeman. And DA Freeman will decide whether Officer Lopez acted properly at the scene. The second investigation into the shooting is our department's internal investigation. This is where we look at all the evidence to determine if the policies and procedures of the Cary Police Department were followed. Given how important the truth is to all of us, what I say to you today may be very limited due to how early on we all are in these 3 very important processes. What I can say is this: we are thankful that a little girl and her grandmother are safe. We are heartbroken that a mother will never see her son again. And we are mindful that a dedicated public servant will never, ever forget what has happened. With that, I'm happy to try to answer any of your questions. Yes, ma'am.
Any body-worn cameras in this for the officers?
So there were no body-worn cameras on any of the officers that were involved that evening.
Do only motorcycle officers wear cameras at the moment?
Yes, that's correct. Only motor officers wear them on a consistent daily basis. We have in-car cameras in all of our vehicles, but that's very difficult to do in a motorcycle, so we deploy body-worn cameras for the motor officers. We also have other body-worn cameras that are available for other situations that may require them, but they aren't signed out on a daily basis. With that said, that's kind of where we are now. But what I can tell you also is that we are working through our budget process with our town manager to look at procuring the funds to be able to implement a policy and that kind of technology in the Cary Police Department sometime in the next fiscal year.
What can you tell us about what led up to this shooting?
What I can tell you is much of what you already know. That is that we received that 911 call from the grandmother and the little girl who saw an intruder, Mr. Johnson, in their home. They retreated inside the home and called 911, and the officers responded as quickly as they possibly could. That's what brought us to the neighborhood. That's what brought us to that location that night.
What about the confrontation between police officers and Mr. Johnson?
So, again, I think it's important to remember that this is a very protracted event. What started at 2:30 with the 911 call actually culminated in that shooting over 2.5 hours later, around 5 a.m. So So this is a long process. The officers have been working diligently during that time to try to track, using canine resources, and locate the person who had entered the home. Ultimately, they came across Mr. Johnson, and you know, that in the process of trying to take him into custody, that's when the incident occurred. What I can tell you is that there was a firearm, there was a revolver that had been previously stolen earlier that evening from a vehicle that had been broken into. That was recovered at the scene. What I can also tell you is that our officer heard that revolver being fired and saw the muzzle flash from that revolver being fired, and that is what led directly to the officer returning fire in self-defense of himself.
How many shots were fired, and where was Mr. Johnson hit?
So that's a great question. Unfortunately, you know, number one, I don't have all the details of that. That is part of what the SBI's investigation very specifically will be looking at. There will be an autopsy performed that will provide some of the answers to that, as well as their interviews with the officers. At this point, I don't have that specific information, but that is certainly a big part of the investigation that the SBI will be looking to determine as quickly as they can.
You said the officer saw the muzzle flash. Was that gun pointed at the officers, or could he tell was it pointed in a different direction?
I honestly don't know what direction that was. All I know is that the officer, at this point, you know, did report that he heard the gun being fired and saw that flash from the muzzle. What direction that was, honestly, I don't have that information at this time. And I think what's important to keep in mind is, with these two investigations going on, you know, really the bigger investigation is the one that determines, you know, was what happened legal or not legal. You know, our investigation, and that's what the SBI is doing. Our investigation is an investigation into was our policies and procedures correctly followed. So they're both very important, but certainly the legality of the situation is critically important. And so we don't want to do anything from the internal affairs side to get in the way or delay anything that the SBI is doing in trying to reach the facts of that part of the investigation, so that the district attorney can make a very educated decision based on the facts on whether or not what happened with Officer Lopez was in fact the correct thing to happen. So I say that to say, you know, we are very cautious not to get in the way of that investigation. We take a bit of a backseat. That doesn't mean we wait until that investigation is complete. We do those concurrently, but we do try to make sure that they have, you know, the expediency to their investigation without us being an impediment to that.
Can you talk a little about the officer involved and his, how long has he been with the department, his history? Does he have any specific connotations or any disciplinary infractions or anything like that?
So what I can tell you is that the officer has been with the Cary Police Department since 2015. He came to us from Lee County Sheriff's Department. So he was an officer there, a deputy there, since 2011. As far as you know, any specific you know, accommodations or anything like that, that is considered personnel record. So I can't really talk about that pursuant to state law and protection of personnel records. But if there's follow-up questions along that line, certainly feel free to let our Public Information Office know. And what we can talk about, we certainly will.
What's his status now? I know there was some information in the press release, but if you could just say what his status is now.
Sure.
And explain what that means.
Sure. So what his status is now, we have placed him on what's called alternative duty assignment. What that means, really, in a nutshell, is we have taken him off of patrol. He is assigned to the patrol division, which is what our operations bureau is referred to. We have taken him off that assignment pending this investigation. He will be working on administrative tasks here in the office until such time as we are comfortable and the district attorney is comfortable with Those things typically are a matter of weeks, not days. So this could be something that takes several weeks, maybe longer, but it all depends on, the expediency with which the SBI is able to kind of get all the facts and get them together and talk to Ms. Freeman.
Do you believe there were any witnesses to the shooting? Did any officers or neighbors see this happen?
We certainly know there were other officers that were in the area that were witnesses to the specific altercation between Officer Lopez and Mr. Johnson. Whether or not there were any civilians, citizens, I am not aware of that, but that is certainly something that the SBI will be looking to determine as they talk to people in the neighborhood.
Is it possible that Mr. Johnson might have had an accomplice? I know there were several larcenies that were taking place. You mentioned electronics. Any idea where if he was working with somebody and what he was doing with the items once he stole them?
So, whether or not Mr. Johnson had any accomplices, that is certainly something that our criminal investigations division is looking at, trying to make that determination. I am not aware of any of that right now. I'm not aware if there's any information that leads our CID unit to believe that. As far as what he was doing with the property, I can tell you that we have recovered a pretty significant amount of property in various locations throughout the neighborhood. The specifics of that I don't know, but I know that there has been property found at different locations throughout the neighborhood as they conducted their investigation. Again, this is stretched over a number of different addresses, and I do think we have to keep in mind that we are dealing with the holiday weekend, and there are some folks that have been out of town that perhaps are just now coming back into town and perhaps just discovering that something is happening at their home. So I don't even know that we have the full breadth at this point of all the residences and victims of those larcenies have been discovered.
Just to clarify, when you say there was property throughout the neighborhood, I mean, were they in vehicles or in piles, or where did you find them?
So yeah, I don't have the specific. I know there was different property that was either discarded or dropped in different places throughout the neighborhood. The specifics of that, honestly, I don't know. But I know that there were several different places that we have recovered different pieces of property from.
Were there any other firearms taken besides just the one?
I'm not aware of any other firearms taken other than the one that was involved in the shooting incident. Yes, sir.
Make sure I have the timeline straight. So, 911 call about 2:38, and then the officer saw somebody running in the house, and then it was about 2 hours later that it was found just a couple blocks away.
Mm-hmm.
So was he hiding somewhere?
So, to say what he was doing would be speculative on my part. What I know is that the officers lost sight of him when he left, when he ran away initially. It is kind of our standard protocol, particularly in very dark locations, to establish a perimeter to try to contain the offender, and then use our canine resources to attempt to track, to attract where that person may have gone on foot. So that's what was going on in that intervening time. What he was doing during that time, frankly, I certainly don't know, and I would suggest that we don't know at least a good portion of that. The investigators may have some information, but I don't think, we certainly don't know what was happening during all of that time as far as what he was doing and where he was. But we know where we saw him initially, we know where we found him ultimately. What happened in that intervening time was the time we were trying to conduct a perimeter, establish a perimeter and use canine resources to track him.
Is his involvement still under investigation with the robberies, or is it safe to say that he definitely was the one committing all the robberies? Did the woman call 911 identify him specifically?
So let me clarify, because a lot of times folks use those terms interchange, I don't know what I'm looking for, but they use those words, where other words are appropriate. So in our world, there's robbery and there's burglary, and those are two very different things. What we're dealing with is burglary, which means somebody entered a residence, in this case, first-degree burglary, which means at night, when the house was occupied. So that is what we're dealing with, is burglaries, not robberies. And then we're dealing with larcenies for motor vehicles specifically. Now, was he identified? Again, I think that is part of the investigation that I can't talk about right now. Those are some of those details that I think are best left to the district attorney as she learns the facts from the SBI. But again, what I do know is that the officers encountered him in the driveway of the home where the 911 call was placed initially, as soon as they arrived, and that's where this all kind of started and kicked off. So, we know he was there at that time. Anything else? Seeing no questions, I will, again, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. And if there's any additional information